Okay, so I'm going to go through Act 3 of A Doll's House, and we're going to start at the opening scene where Linda goes and she sees Krogstad. And there's, of course, a history there. And so, as a contrast to Nora, Linda wants someone to take care of. She wants to feel needed. I think Nora wants to figure out who she is and be herself, whereas Linda, she doesn't. She's, one way to think about characters. One way my professor told us is there's intricate characters and there's simple characters, and sometimes there's round and flat. And you probably learned the round and flat one. But if you think about an intricate character, that's a character who actually questions and changes and challenges the system. Whereas a simple character is usually pretty content with whatever happens. They don't really have a whole lot of issues and concerns, and they're probably more content. But another negative term for that would be complacent. But anyhow, so Krogstad, like I said, and he's an ambiguous character because he's supposed to be a villain, and yet when you read closer into it, you see that there's no one is really black and white except Torvald, and Krogstad is sorry for what he did, and then Linda makes this statement that it's very well to what lengths a man like you might be driven to do by despair. So the fact that she understands that he was driven, and probably as a survival for himself and his kids, that's why, it really wouldn't hurt Nora and Torvald to help him. So he's going to ask for the letter back and say, don't worry about it. And he and Christine are going to get together. And then, meanwhile, they're at the party. And this there's a foreshadowing of what happens when Nora wants to stay at the party. She's having a good time. She's not ready to go home. And he commands her, again, kind of like a father would, like a parent, and says, no, it's time, you're going to catch a cold, it's time to come home. And she says, you will repent not having let me stay, even if it were just half an hour. And I think what she's doing at this point is trying to give Torvald any kind of chance to just be a giving husband, not just giving her what he thinks she should have, but respecting her enough to compromise a little bit, because that's what marriage is. It is mostly compromise. But he gives her what he wants to see her in, and instead of giving her the things that she, just because she wants that at that particular moment, whatever it is, it may be small or whatever, but just respecting her to be able to make her own decisions. So what I wanted to point out, though, about the dance is when he says, when he starts to critique it, and he says, although possibly performance was a trifle too realistic, a little more so, than was compatible with the limitations of art. So he's talking about the dance in terms of like aesthetics, and in the way that you would talk about maybe a painting or something like that. And so you see how the dehumanization, first of all, in her performance, and he doesn't like the fact that it's realistic. And this is a play, a realist play, and I think this is also kind of foreshadowing what happens when she wants to have a conversation with him, and he doesn't get it. He wants to see her as kind of his own creation. And this gets into Lacan's theory of desire, especially when you see what he says later on, which sounds kind of creepy when he talks about why he doesn't talk to her too much while they're at the party. And he kind of keeps his distance because he wants, to pretend that they're young lovers and they're not, basically not married. And so the fantasy of Nora, the idea of Nora is more about, as Lacan would say, it's not the it you desire, it's the desire of it. Because once you really get what you want, you can't want it the same way that you do. That's why infatuation is so powerful. Because it's the desire, it's the fantasy of having it. But when you do actually have it, and this is what happens sometimes I think with marriage, is the expectation of marriage is usually a lot more grand than the actual what actually happens. Like we romanticize what our future jobs may be, and what our future kids will be, and what our future husband, and we have an idea of what that should be, and it's never like you think it's going to be. It really isn't. And so as he finds out what she did, he says that this is so he says, what a horrible awakening, and there it is. It's from that dream, that desire. And you notice if I use someone like Lacan, you should have a little bit of a background on some people like Lacan and Freud and maybe Machiavelli, and just when you study a piece like this, it's good to have some background of how other people write about its scholarship, and what other people say in their essays, just so you can kind of frame the piece with a higher interpretation of the text, because you're really competing with like the smartest people, the kids, students, all over the United States. Okay, they will have some background on this, and if you're being compared, and all you can offer is what happened and a summary of what happened, which you're not even supposed to write about summary. It really depends on your analysis and what you come up with as a claim, because otherwise, and I always say that the Q3 is the one essay that you can control, and that's why I work on it the most, because you have no idea what poem they'll throw at you, or what prose piece. You still have to be able to analyze it, but the way that you analyze and practice with these types of texts is how you're going to do it when you see something that is a cold read. And the more variety, the more you know about a particular text, the more you're going to know about the next one and the next one. So you're building. I was telling a student today, there's really no way to just say, okay, I'm going to go get tutoring real quick for this test, or we're going to review for this test. There is no review for this test. This is it. This is how it's done. So anyway, so you have to be just looking at this in depth. And so his vision of her is destroyed. But that's all it really is. He doesn't know her. He can't truly love her. He loves the idea of her. And that idea is sort of kind of an idea that is projected onto women. And I think this is why we have, I think this is why women are particularly also hard on themselves, as far as the way they look or whatever else, because in the back of their mind, they think that there's this expectation that they're supposed to be here to please men. And that's not true. But when you don't know any different, like she says, when she finally sits down and says, we're going to have a real conversation. I didn't even know what my opinions were. I don't know anything about, I mean, you're asking me about morality. How do I even answer that? I've never had a minute to think about it for myself. I've always been told, like, first my father told me what to think, and now you tell me what to think. And so is that a life? And so when you get to the end in her decision and wanting to leave, um, it's I mean, you can kind of see where it's a choice between life or death. If it's death, if she stays, I mean, it's she is nobody, and if she goes, then she will be able to discover herself and the truth of who she is. And I think that that is at the core of every human being and their desire. Everyone wants to know what their purpose is. So I'm going through this kind of quickly. Of course, when he goes back to himself, when he feels the reprieve of the letter, and Krogstad says, no, not so much. But she's already made up her mind, and he still doesn't get it. He says, you don't understand. I forgive you. And what he says in not having the sufficient knowledge. If you think about that, she made a decision based on something other than sufficient knowledge. It's a very calculated response. And, men are usually more associated with reason and women are more with emotion. But it does take a certain amount of emotion to answer, critical questions. It's not a science. In when you're studying humanity, it's not. And that's what we're looking at, philosophy and psychology, to put these pieces in context, because it raises those types of questions, and that's what makes it important as a work to study, and to, it's not just about you reading and knowing the plot and the story. Nobody cares about that. I don't even care about that. I care about the story to see what it symbolically represents and what it teaches us, and how we grow from it, how we go from there. So anyways, I think one of the best lines is when he says that when I guess she's kind of hinting in what she wanted to have happen. She never really quite says what it is. But you mean I would never have accepted such a sacrifice on your part? She says, of course not. But what would my assurances have been worth against yours? What would the wonderful thing which I hoped for and feared, and it was to prevent that, I wanted to kill myself? And he says, I would gladly work day and night for you, Nora, bear sorrow and want for your sake. But no man would sacrifice his honor for the one he loves. And she says, it is a thing hundreds of thousands of women have done. And if you think about it, they have. And women still make that decision, when they sacrifice, like, maybe what they initially wanted to do with their life. And because of the kids or whatever, they have to sacrifice a part of themselves to try to make this work. And sometimes you get to a point where you can, when the kids move on, and I think that's kind of when women decide, well, it's almost like another chance, of really finding yourself, because now you don't have to think about it in terms of the kids, and you do. If you're a good mother at all, you do. You try to organize your entire life around your husband and kids. But to get to that essence of who you really are, that's something that's still going to be inside of you, really wanting, to discover that in order to find some purpose. So, okay. Then at a last attempt, he says, but can't we just live here like brother and sister? Which just seems really kind of bizarre to just throw that out there. But again, it's not a real marriage. It's just an idea. It's just a fantasy. So at any rate, as long as he's not alone, because she wants to find herself without somebody else defining. He doesn't. He's fine with this being all a part of who I am. I don't think he really knows who he is either. He lets society decide that, and law and order, and whatever role he believes he's supposed to be playing. But he is just playing a role, and she doesn't want to play a role. She wants to live. And so that ends when she says, of course, there was that one thing, that one miracle that she was hoping for. And I think I said this in the last lecture, that she was just hoping that maybe he would man up and take the blame and sacrifice his honor the way that women have sacrificed their honor for men. That wasn't going to happen. And he still kind of leaves, when he think the last thing, he's like, what was that wonderful thing of all that could have happened? What was that miracle? So anyways, I'm going to be working on some courses for The Great Gatsby. If you want to start reading The Great Gatsby, I'm going to set those up on the website, and Elite Literary Book Group, if you want to join us and subscribe, please. Thank you.